My name's Andrew Lamb. I used to work upstairs. I used to be a member of staff. I was the Chief Executive of Engineers Without Borders. Having been Chief Executive of an organisation, I've basically been unemployable ever since. So I'm a consultant, freelance consultant. I'm doing some work with the World Bank, with the World Federation of Engineering Organisations, and with Field Ready. And the general area that I'm interested in is the idea of technology empowering people and sort of removing barriers to development. The ideas that we developed at Engineers Without Borders, which has become part of what I'm exploring at the moment, is the concept of massive small change. And I will throw some thoughts about that in towards the end of my presentation if there is time. But I realised that the title I gave, the description I gave of my talk wasn't a very sexy title. It was many, many words with many, many syllables. So I want to talk about essentially the concept of humanitarian makers. But to do that, I need to tell you about the work that we've been doing with Field Ready on 3D printing in disaster zones. So let me get started by talking about Field Ready. Humanitarian supplies made in the field. That's the idea. Now, I should also say a little bit about what we've been doing on the Nepal earthquake response, because I'm not really going to cover that in the presentation. I'm going to be talking mainly about the work we've been doing in Haiti. This essentially it's too early for Field Ready to have much of a presence there at the moment, and it's also too early for Field Ready. We have had a couple of people there doing assessments and making links with local manufacturers and local maker communities. We will definitely be involved in doing some of our work in Nepal later this year. I'm going to be talking mainly about the work we've been doing in Haiti in this presentation. But I think the Nepal earthquake example is instructive, because already, within a week of the earthquake happening, we started seeing stories emerge of the kind of problems that Field Ready and Humanitarian Makers has been set up to solve. So the idea of humanitarian aid piling up at Kathmandu airport because they can't get it through customs. There just isn't enough. There aren't enough officials, there isn't enough capacity, there may not be enough lubrication in the system to get things through customs quickly enough. There are all sorts of barriers. In fact, they have a problem at Tribhuvan airport where the size of the aeroplanes that are distributing the aid, the C-130s and the Hercules aircraft, is damaging the runway. So they're having to land the planes in India or in Pakistan, move the aid into smaller aeroplanes, and then land the smaller aeroplanes. So there's been issues like that. There's issues around coordination and logistics, but I mean, this is the classic one, transportation problems. You can get the aid to the capital, you can get the aid to the international airports, then how do you do it? And you're talking about the Himalayas here. At the best of times, the roads aren't good. It's the worst of times now. So it's this question of how you get aid from A to B, from essentially the place where it's made to the people who need it. Between 60 and 80% of all of the income that goes to humanitarian organisations that do direct response is spent essentially on aid procurement and aid logistics. So this is about buying the stuff and shipping it to the people who need it. Between 60 and 80% of the income. Every year, that equates to between $10 to $15 billion. It's spent on humanitarian procurement and logistics. So it's international and local transport, it's warehousing, it's distribution, and then other sort of associated activities like accounting and information systems and things like that. Paying drivers and paying security for around the warehouses. This is not a small problem. this is a fundamental problem, and for a lot of, I'm sure Robert will be able to say about his experiences with Ebola in Sierra Leone. You know, aid workers really struggle because of the problems in the supply chain, of not being able to get the kit. It is a big problem. So it's an area that is ripe for disruption, for innovation, for a change. And I think it's worth thinking a little bit about where innovation comes from. And there's lots of research on this. You know, lots of governments are interested in innovation. And a commonly said thing is diverse teams, people with different expertise coming together. Sometimes people say necessity, the mother of invention. You know, it's in these crisis situations when new ideas emerge, where people put the normal motivations of life to one side and put sort of humanitarian imperatives and humanitarian motivations sort of forward. It can also be just from hard labour of, you know, deep research. You know, there's lots of innovations which come out from a lot of perspiration as well as inspiration, right? But thinking about inspiration for a little bit, I think that a lot of innovation, you know, things like this, come from Star Trek. Like, Steve Jobs was sat watching episodes of Star Trek and said, I'm going to make one of those, and now we've all got iPads. You know? These things, Star Trek communicators, the hypodermic, what do you call those needles that we use in Star Trek? I'm not that well versed, to be honest. The hypersprays, that's what they're called. And now, you know, the EpiPens that diabetes people use, people with diabetics use. So there's a lot of inspiration that you can get from science fiction. And the same applies for humanitarian response. This is a scene from Star Trek that I'm going to play you. Star Trek The Next Generation, Captain Jean-Luc Picard, for those of you that are not well versed. And this is essentially a very left-wing take. Star Trek has an incredible ability to annoy the religious right, and this is a very left-wing take on essentially the Arab-Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this guy here is essentially a Bajoran leader or a Palestinian leader, very left-wing take on it. And I mentioned the Cardassians, who are essentially a very left-wing take on the Israelis. And this guy is essentially representing the United Federation of Planets, or the United Nations, who've come to offer support.
We're in a position to help. Your people have been forced to resettle all over the quadrant, but now we can make a legitimate case with the Cardassians that this is not an isolated problem. We can work diplomatically on your behalf. But first, these terrorist attacks must end.
We live in different universes, you and I. Yours is about diplomacy, politics, strategy. Mine is about blankets. If we were to exchange places for one night, you might better understand.
Mr. Data, see that the replicators provide a blanket for every man, woman, and child before nightfall.
Aye, sir.
Mr. Worf, determine what these people may have in the way of emergency needs and provide for them.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Done. Done. And that's the way aid work, relief work will be done in the future. These people need blankets. Well, let's make some blankets and give it to them. Now, it's about inspiration. That's one of the places that innovation comes from. Now, the replicators in Star Trek are energy matter devices. As well as making blankets, they can also make dry martinis, you know, to the future. But it's basically this idea of manufacturing on site. And at the moment, we don't have this kind of technology. We don't have the power and capabilities to be able to make anything just from a computer file. What we do have is the C-130s, the Hercules aircraft, and remote manufacturing or micro-manufacturing technologies such as 3D printers. But not just 3D printers, also things like small extruders and laser cutters and all of the things that you might find in a fab lab or a makerspace. We will get here eventually. I mean, 24th century is a long time to wait. But we're going to start here. So we're going to start deploying technologies like this through Field Ready so we can make humanitarian supplies in the field. This is the diagram of the current humanitarian supply chain made by Field Ready's co-founder Eric James, who was a trustee of RedR. I met him in this room. And you can see there's the manufacturers that, then the supplies get stockpiled at the international warehouses, particularly in places like Panama, Bangkok, Pakistan, where the supplies just degrade. The refugee tents sat on the shelf for 6 months are basically unusable by the end of it. And then during the deployment, you have national warehouses, probably at the joint logistics centres, regional warehouses, local warehouses, distribution points. You have all manner of transport logistics mechanisms to get you there. There's often quite a big environmental impact if you're sourcing raw materials from the local environment, such as wood. And we basically, at Field Ready, want to replace this with this. And just make stuff in the communities that need stuff. So phrases like nimble manufacturing or hyper-local manufacturing are the kind of thing that we're kind of innovation area that we're working in. But if you're familiar with the Makespace movement or the Hackerspace movement or the Fab Lab movement, these are essentially rooms like this that are full of kit, where you can pay a membership fee, or sometimes they're free, and you can go along and you can make stuff. And they're actually really popular in London because not a lot of people in London have a garage or a garden shed where they can go and make stuff. And also the tools can be quite expensive, like you're talking about for an off-the-shelf 3D printer, maybe £250. So if you just want to make one thing, it's not really worth buying. So the idea of getting these make spaces where people can come together and make stuff into a deployable form is really what we're talking about. That's where we're trying to get with Field Ready. And at the moment, what essentially we're doing is a bit of some pilots and some testing for that. We've written a little bit about it in the humanitarian community. This is a paper we wrote for OCHA last year. And we've had in the maker community articles such as in Replicator World, but also Wired Magazine and Make Magazine, publications like that talks about the concept. But happily, I have another video for you, because every good NGO has to have a promotional video.
In the aftermath of a rapid onset disaster, literally 500 families show up overnight.
There's lack of power, there's lack of access, there's lack of infrastructure. People simply can't get the things they need.
Supply chains for humanitarian aid are very long. It takes a very long time, even to get the most basic items.
It could be anything from buckets to umbilical cord clamps.
Field Ready is really about trying to solve the supply chain problem.
We realized that some of the new technologies like 3D printing can actually be moved out to the field. Having the ability to manufacture, to make items directly on site can really be transformative and allows people to have capacities that in the past could only be dreamt of. Field Ready is providing humanitarian aid by improving logistics and supply chains.
Producing products on demand in the onset of disasters.
Additive manufacturing is taking a 3D design that could be a scan, so you can literally capture the form of something that already exists, or you can draw something from scratch.
That was all of what, like 3 minutes?
That then gets processed and sent to a machine that interprets the design and adds material where it's needed. You can go from a design to a finished part in basically one step. You can give it a different design every day, every minute, and it will make you a different thing.
Right now, we're using basic desktop 3D printers. These are sort of made for the do-it-yourself type of people.
We've prototyped 6 different designs today. We made one, we tested it, we went, hey, it's good, but if this clip was a bit more solid, that would be better. Okay, change the design, print another one, 10 minutes later, that's a better clip.
The items that we can actually manufacture tend to be small, but the ability to make many different things is what's really unique about it. As long as we have a basic power source and the designs, we can fabricate virtually anything that would be needed.
Real Hope for Haiti is a small clinic up north. They provide women in the agriculture areas and out in the mountains where they have no access to hospitals with birthing kits. So they've asked us to provide them with umbilical cord clamps. And this is really useful because they can then print an umbilical cord clamp in less than 8 minutes.
It's a standard tension that can be used. It's easier to keep clean and to help mother and baby stay healthy and safe and infection-free.
So now Mark is showing the guys the prototypes of the clamp, and so they're going to learn, they're setting up the printers to do the prototyping and testing.
The speed and resolution and mainly reliability of these 3D printers is improving all the time. You can 3D print seals, so there's flexible materials can be printed, carbon fiber reinforced parts to make stronger parts. There's photosensitive resins that can produce much higher quality prints, so we'll be able to produce even more detailed and precise medical components.
One of the most exciting things we're actually looking at is recycling.
Shredding plastic, whether that's waste plastic or previously used prints, melting that down and extruding our own filament.
By doing this, we're able to be both environmentally friendly and keep some level of sustainability going. You know, when anyone sees it for the first time, they're kind of like, wow, look at that. You actually just made an object out of software.
Oh, do you see the black? Do you remember that?
It looks great to me.
One of the reasons why we chose Haiti was because there's a very high degree of vulnerability in the country, a lot of endemic poverty and so on.
During the earthquake, the airport was actually overflowing with a bunch of materials, some of which were not needed, and the tools and medication that was needed couldn't actually get access because of the congestion.
There's always going to be things that on the ground we can't anticipate.
Haiti is a really good place as a test bed to figure out and test out all the things that could happen in a disaster.
We've been able to test our equipment, test our approach, and test our people to see that all these things can come together for future more challenging countries. We have a great team already. We're combining...
A great team. Yeah, we do. It's, there's lots of... It's all volunteers at the moment. But we have got some funding from the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, from DFID, which is helping us to fund these sorts of field trials. I mean, essentially that was aimed at humanitarian logisticians who haven't understood what 3D printing is or what remote manufacturing is. So there's a lot of emphasis on the potential of 3D printing. If you know more about 3D printing, you realize actually it's a very glossy version of the reality of the situation, which is that you can only really make small things quickly. It's quite hard to make big things quickly. You can increasingly print in different materials, different kinds of plastics like rubber and carbon fiber reinforcements, and even like wood effect type things, conducting, non-conducting. You can mix different materials. We've got a printer with 2 print heads on it. But the really interesting stuff from the manufacturing point of view comes when you are able to start using printers to print in metal, because then you can start making spare parts for Toyota Land Cruisers, or making spare joints for shelters. And so suddenly, if an aid agency in South Sudan has a fleet of 13 Land Cruisers, but only 4 of them work because the rest of them are being cannibalized for spare parts because the supply chain just isn't there to get the supply chain to get the spare parts into those vehicles otherwise. Well, we can make them. That's the idea.